What's going on, guys? It is Tempest from WrestleTalk.com. I am, of course, joined by the one and only Sonal Lad, as we are here to review the latest week in New Japan Pro Wrestling's G1 Climax tournament. Similar to last week, we have a lot of shows to cover. The first week was kind of the outlier of everything. You know, we only had 2 shows to cover that week, but every week since, we've had 4 shows. So we will be running through each of the shows this week. That, of course, is day 9 through 12. We will be going through the chat as much as possible and interacting with people, and of course, going through super chats as if any come in, and we'll see how things go. You know, so we'll get things started off first. Of course, Sonal, how has your week been?
Yeah, it's been great. It's been obviously busy, like you said, but you know what? I can't complain with all the New Japan content. Obviously, you're probably excited today because it's your birthday eve.
It's true. Tomorrow I get a little bit older and I get treated to another wonderful G1 Climax show that we will be doing live coverage of. It will be very exciting. Kazuchika Okada and Shingo Takagi is a match that I'm very interested to see, and it makes a very good birthday gift from New Japan. So I thank them for that. But as you said, we have a lot to get into. It was a busy week, so we'll run down each of these matches as best we can. Some more than others, of course, as people start to file in. It's very good to see some of the regular people in the chat. So first up, we have day 9. So Shingo Takagi faced Yujiro Takahashi in the first match. Now, we've kind of been skipping over much of Yujiro's matches. We will be talking about one of his matches in a little bit. But to me, this was just like another example of, you know, if you start the G1 Climax show, you can probably skip over this one.
I mean, I always say this, but like Yujiro, this is probably the best we've seen Yujiro in a few years. Like, in terms of, like, he's putting on singles matches, which is a miracle in itself. He's in a G1. And I think, like, he probably knew going into this that he was going to lose. Like, compared to the people in the block, he might as well be a young lion with, like, the amount of, pastime he's got. So, and his place has never been further than the first match, I think, so far. So,
yeah. I think... I could be wrong. I think he wrestled in the second match one time. I could be wrong.
I know one of his next week is the second, but I think most of them happened first.
Yeah, I seem to remember one of the matches being like second on the card, and we were like, "Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why that is," you know, and such. But moving on, you know, we don't need to dwell too much on Yujiro and all that, because the second match was Jeff Cobb defeating Jay White. And that one to me came as a bit of a shock. You know, shock might be a bit too strong of a word, because, I mean, Jeff Cobb is still at least somewhat being protected in this tournament. But Jay White is obviously being pushed as a front runner. And this was one of the matches that he lost. So if Jay White goes all the way in this tournament and ends up winning it, maybe we see that being the match at Power Struggle where he has to defend the briefcase. Will it happen? I don't know. There's a lot still to come in this tournament, but for this match, I thought it was very good.
I mean, you said that. It's not really a shock, but if Jay was going to lose to someone, like, especially first, I didn't expect it to be Cobb. Like, Cobb's an amazing wrestler. Like, I love him to bits because, like, he's crazy strong and, like, athletic, but as you said, they're building Jay up to get this win, and for him to lose to Cobb, who has lost quite a few matches, and maybe compared to, for example, if he lost against Ibushi or Okada, it was slightly different. But yeah, I mean, as a Jay White fan, it was heartbreaking to see that. But, like, sort of part of me was happy because I was like, Jeff Cobb's got quite a big win now, and hopefully it's a bit of momentum.
Yeah. Well, again, we kind of see it going forward in the tournament. Like, Jeff Cobb didn't necessarily like keep the ball rolling with his next match in terms of wins anyway. But you know, it's the nature of the game, though. Like, the G1 Climax is going to have a bunch of these kind of random matches thrown in where you don't see the upset coming. And I think this so far was one of the bigger upsets of the tournament.
Definitely.
Beyond that, we had Okada defeating Suzuki. So this one to me was interesting because
Yeah.
Kazuchika Okada is one of the best rivals of Minoru Suzuki and vice versa in each other's careers. Maybe
Mhm.
not as like prolific and historic as like the Suzuki Tanahashi rivalry or Suzuki Nagata and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Okada and Suzuki have gone back a few years and have always had good matches. This to me was probably their weakest match, but if this to me again was another match where it was greatly hurt by the pandemic and not being able to cheer and all that sort of thing. Like Okada in particular has been someone who I felt it has been greatly impacted by just not being able to have the crowd like coming alive and really cheering. Like some people get away with like a lot of just like applause, clapping, but he is one of the guys that really needs that like visceral, just like vocal reaction. And I think it's hurting these matches a little bit.
And I think it's even as simple as when he takes off his like skirt and he used to get like the big pop. And even something as little as that and could feel it affect. Like I thought it was a good match. It was, like you said, it's affected also, I think, by the position in the card. Like it was basically a very condensed version of stuff that they did at Royal Quest. But I also think, I don't know if it was meant, that finish was meant to be a finish because it was very messy. But Okada winning with a roll-up, I think it made sense because it's not in any way made Suzuki look bad. Because I think if, for example, Okada had beaten Suzuki with a submission, I think you'd have been a bit confused by that because obviously Suzuki is Suzuki. But, I mean, as we'll talk about probably later on, like, is this Okada's new thing now? Like, he tried the Rainmaker. He was doing some submissions. Is it a roll-up now?
Yeah, it almost feels like he's absolutely adamantly against using the Rainmaker. Because like if you're not going to beat Suzuki with a submission, which I agree you shouldn't do, why not just use your finisher that is over and has been tried and true and a good finisher? I don't know. I don't get it. This one for me, like the match to me was still good. Like it was still a good match, one of the best on the show. But just
It was
use
the
the
finish.
Rainmaker.
The finish, it was almost like it was messy, like it wasn't even actually planned. Like,
Right.
was it meant to go on for a bit longer? It was just for Okada, it was very messy because we're used to seeing him doing perfect things.
Exactly. We're used to seeing Okada be perfection, and this was not that. It was still good. It's like when you get a guy who gets 100% on every test, and then he gets like a 90%. Well, that's still good, but you're used to seeing it at such a high level. So I don't know. We'll see. But I'm ready for him to start using the Rainmaker again.
I've
There's
missed
been a
it.
lot
It's
of.
one of the best finishes
It
like
is.
in the world. So
I absolutely love it, but what can you do? Hopefully we see it come back. There's been a lot of talk here in the chat about the various matches. It's very good. We like to encourage that. And Antonio Correa says, "Hey Tempest and Sonal, thoughts on featuring a lot of New Japan Pro Wrestling references and footage? Do you think the AEW partnership can after Harold leaves, or is this just a one-off?" Basically asking if what we thought of the references and everything on AEW Dynamite this past week. I was coming out of my skin this week. I was very excited because my whole thing is clearly there's been some sort of change with Harold May leaving. And we had the report come out from Fightful Select, which everyone should go and subscribe to Fightful Select and read what they've posted, where they had a lot of talk and insight from stars of New Japan and AEW saying that they didn't like working with Harold May. There were people on the inside, the outside who had been with New Japan, people that are still with New Japan, and everyone just kind of said, like, you know, we've had a personal relationship with Harold May. We didn't like working with him professionally anymore. And you kind of get the feeling that he was really the guy kind of standing in the way of a partnership like this. And then as soon as he's gone, or at least announced to be gone, you start getting all of these references now coming out on AEW Dynamite, which had not been the case prior. It had kind of been alluded to prior to this.
Mm-hmm.
People saying like, oh, did Kenny leave his heart and soul in Japan, and not say like anything beyond that. And then on this show, you've got Hiroshi Tanahashi popping up in a video. You've got New Japan Pro Wrestling being completely mentioned in full in the Lance Archer, Jon Moxley video packages, talking about their match on January 4th in the Tokyo Dome. And then you've got Kenny Omega talking, not saying the G1 Climax by name, but certainly talking about it, saying like, oh, I've won tournaments on my first try, such and such. I don't think that's a coincidence. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is something. And I don't know if it's just wishful thinking, but I really want to see this happen.
I think that's the thing. Like, people are looking really into it, and it's going to be one of those things that it's going to be really disappointing if it's actually just like, oh no, they're just using the references. So I think if it happens, it's going to be really exciting because it'll be a lot more diverse. Like, will the New Japan titles be defended on AEW, which will be great because Moxley can now have a lot more matches with his US title. Obviously, there are so many guys who would be amazing in New Japan. Like, if you think of people like Darby Allin in the Best of Super Junior and things like that, there's so many opportunities. And depending on how far that even goes, if it's maybe not just a link with New Japan, but Bushi Road, think about the links with Stardom as well, like the female talent from there.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't even thought of that, but that's an excellent point. And that would really help out their, struggles with the AEW women's division and everything. And yeah, I really want to see it happen. I think it would be really good for both companies. You could definitely see like a ton of just unbelievable matches that we've seen before and new matches that we've never seen. That to me is very exciting. So
I also think there's a lot of unfinished business as well. Like, if you think about like the way, especially in the Elite, the way they just left New Japan, I feel like there is a lot that can be done there, like with the books. Even with things like Hangman Page, there is the opportunity to even call upon things from like 2 years ago in the G1 with Tanahashi. Like, anything could happen.
There's so many options and different things they can do. Finishing out the first day, because of course we do have a lot to get through as well, without going off on too many tangents here. But we do, of course, appreciate all of the people sending in chats and all the discussion points that are being brought up. We do see them. We will get back to them. Don't worry. Then we had Tomohiro Ishii beating Taichi. These two work incredibly well together. And of course, like, Ishii tends to work well with everyone, as we will see later. But this is just another example of Taichi stepping up over the last year plus. Really, since he had his singles match with Ishii at Dominion in 2019, when he dropped the Never title to him. Ever since then, I think he's been just on his game much more than he had been. And this was another example of that.
I think just they're two guys that work together. Like, there's been the stories, obviously, that they were two of the black sheep who came to New Japan, like those two, and then I think it was Honma as well. And there's something about them. Like, yes, I think even in this match, Taichi might have gone for like the sneaky style bit, but compared to his other matches, whenever he's in the ring with Ishii, it's normally a very clean match and a very good match. Like, the stuff that they do, it's like, even the start, like, they know each other so well now, but they can still produce matches that like can shock you. And like you said, with Ishii, Taichi can really shine. And there's some opponents where he gets hidden behind like the Iron Fist and things like that. But with Ishii, he can just shine as a proper wrestler.
Yeah. This is probably the best example of that, even more so with than against guys like Shingo Takagi or Kazuchika Okada. Because if you go in there with Tomohiro Ishii, you're just having like a mean, tough, hard-hitting wrestling match. As Jobber JJ, who I don't think is in the chat, but as he would say, it was stiff as a horse. This is just, like I said, another example of Tomohiro Ishii bringing the best out of his opponents. And I don't know if there is a better example of that than with Taichi, because they've had probably like 3 really good singles matches now, both from Dominion 2019, last year's G1 Climax, and now this year's G1 Climax. They've hit every time they've wrestled. And that to me is very impressive because we have seen Taichi have matches where he gets really carried away with, the stalling and the theatrics, the interference, that sort of thing, which really does bring down his matches. But this just, they don't have that problem when they face each other. So good. More of this, please.
Great match. It's a very good match.
And then we had the main event of day 9, which was Kota Ibushi and Will Ospreay, which is, of course, a rematch of the Wrestle Kingdom 13 match. And then, of course, they had their second match last year in the G1. They had split those two matches 1-1. Obviously, Ospreay won at Wrestle Kingdom 13, capturing the never openweight title. And then Ibushi got his win back in the G1 last year. Both of those matches were phenomenal. The Wrestle Kingdom match was one of the best opening matches, ever, really, in wrestling history. I can't think of too many better matches than that. I'm sure there have been some, but it's in that top tier. And then they had, obviously, a 5-star match in the G1 last year. This, to me, felt like another match where if the fans had been allowed to cheer and all that, this would have gotten to that, 5-star level tier. It's just, it's one of those matches where you get the Osprey versus Shingo, and they can still have the kind of match that reaches that match of the year candidate level, even despite the pandemic. But there are most of the matches in this tournament really that just get bumped down just half a peg because of the lack of crowd reaction. But it was still great and most likely match of the show.
I think, I agree with the audience here, but I also think the timing's I think I looked at it after and it was only about 15 minutes. And I think with two guys like that, they had the ability to go 25 minutes. And you're right with the crowd, especially when it's a babyface versus babyface match. It was almost when the crowds, when Red Shoes used to go to each guy and see who's got the louder cheers. It's little things like that which just add to a match. It's sort of like a sport like football or something. When you've got a crowd, it's going to be so much better. But like you said, it didn't get away from the match. Both guys, especially now Ospreay's put on a bit of weight, both guys are a lot more similar. They've got the strength, they've got the speed, the agility. It was like a hybrid of junior and heavyweight wrestling.
Yeah, because when they had wrestled previously, Will Ospreay was still a junior, even though he was wrestling for the never openweight title, which primarily features heavyweights, and then, of course, competing in the G1 last year, which is a heavyweight tournament. He was still the undersized guy. They were still similar in their styles, but as far as one being a heavyweight, one being a junior, Kota Ibushi still had that advantage. This time, they were much more, like you said, on the same level, but Ibushi was still able to come out and get the win. So, I don't know. This one to me is very interesting. We'll get into the block standings in just a little bit, but this was another one of those matches that may look like it kind of decides the fate of a lot of things in the tournament. Because a lot of these guys, there's a lot of parity at the top, But we'll get into that because that is day 9. Moving on to day 10. There's not a whole lot to talk about with the first match because Haruki Goto beat Toru Yano in 18 seconds. It was the fastest match in G1 history.
It was, going into it, because Goto, we've said this, Goto sort of flatlined this G1. And I almost think that was actually the perfect way because Yano is a Chaos Faction member like him. You'd think that there'd be some sort of thing, but literally Goto went in there, got it done, and I think he needed that. He needed to prove, I can still wrestle. I don't care if he's my friend. I'm going to beat him as quick as possible and get out of there. And I think it was also just quite funny just to see Yano, even in the backstage comment, he was like, I want to start this again. That didn't go my way. And you know what? I think it's funny because I think if someone said Toru Yano had an 18-second match, people probably would have assumed that he won it. But right. I quite like that Goto did beat him that quickly because sometimes you think, shouldn't everyone be able to beat Yano a lot quicker?
Yeah, I mean, you need matches like this every so often. You understand that Toru Yano's matches are not going to be the super long 20-minute classics or anything like that. But again, to me, it's it's fun when you can have a match like this and it's over quick, because you're not expecting it, right? Like no one's expecting an 18-second match in the G1. You know, it's very similar to me. Yeah, I was like,
I
oh my
blinked
god,
and
it's
it
over.
ended.
Yeah, you know, it was very similar to me as the Yano Sonata match from like 2 years ago when Sonata, excuse me, tied him up in the guardrail in like
the
2
Paradise
minutes
Lock.
and won by countout. Yeah, exactly.
Was that the one where he tied Rocky as well?
Yeah, he tied up
that
Rocky
was one of my
Romero
favorite
in
matches.
the Paradise Lock. Yeah, I love that match because it was like 2 minutes long, and I watched it thinking like, you need matches like that just for the sake of separating everything and making everything different. You know, so I really like that one. This one to me, like, you can only like it so much for its 18-second runtime, but I did think it has its place in the G1. Stephen Kelly in the chat asked, how do you guys watch New Japan? That is on njpwworld.com, sir. An excellent streaming service where you get all the live shows and a good amount of their archive as well. And it's 999 yen a month, which is about 10 Canadian dollars, 10 US dollars, something around there. You know, if you're paying for the WWE network, it's usually about the same price.
It's only about £7 in the UK, depending on conversion, which is amazing for what you're getting, especially in a month like the G1.
I mean, yeah, this is, if you're going to sign up for it, this is a good month to do it. You know, beyond that, we had what I thought was the match of this show, which is Sonata defeating Zack Saber Jr. We know these two work well together. We've seen them have very good matches together in the past. And this was another example of that, as Sonata was able to out-wrestle Zack Saber Jr., which has happened before, so it's not totally out of left field, but Sonata getting a little bit more back on track.
I think if, like, I'm always like a bit, like I said with Okada and Suzuki, Okada would never be able to beat Suzuki with a submission. But for example, for me, I've always think Sonata and Zack are very well evenly matched. And also their chemistry, like I'm just remembering, I think it was Wrestle Kingdom in the press conference where like Sonata was wearing pink pants and Zack just kept going, Saya. And I just think because of this like almost banterous relationship, like we know, like Zack Sabre Jr.'s even said, he's like Sonata's handsome, he's a very good wrestler. And he doesn't say that much. So it almost just makes it an even better rivalry. And I just love the fact that in the post-match comment, Zack was like, let's have a best of series. Let's have a best of like 300 series. And I think people would love to see it because they are such a good match for each other.
Yeah, I mean, sign me up for that. I don't think too many people would be complaining about seeing Sonata and Zack Sabre Jr. wrestle 300 times. These guys just, they, like you said, they match up very well together. And everyone kind of knows that Sonata is a very well-rounded wrestler. He's a very good technical wrestler. But obviously, like, Zack Sabre Jr. is known for that. That's like number one, the thing he's known for. He is the technical wrestler in today's wrestling. You know,
he's a submission master for a reason.
Exactly. And that's not a nickname for him. That is who he is. That's his style. That's everything that is Zack Sabre Jr. So seeing these guys wrestle and Sonata coming out on top again, it's always interesting, you know, just watching, because it reminds you that Sonata is that good. You know, it's not just someone beating Zack Sabre Jr., it's someone out wrestling Zack Sabre Jr. And that's something that doesn't happen often, which means that Sonata doing it is that much more important. You know, Dan has now popped into the chat saying, does anyone know who's eligible in the New Japan draft? No one, Dan. Thank you, Wayu TV. Every week you pop in here talking about New Japan Underground or something. We're trying to have a good time here, Dan. Thank you. Always appreciate you. But we'll move on from there, because it's tough with this next one, because you had Evil defeating Juice Robinson. Now, I spoke a lot about Juice Robinson early in the tournament because he rattled off like 3 wins in a row to start, and I was like, okay,
probably the best run he's had at the start, like probably since he started. Like he's never done this well. Like
he barely got any wins in the 2017 G1. I think he got like 2 or 3 maybe in the whole tournament.
And then it was the same in the first tournament, 8 or 10, I think, last year. I think he said something like that.
Yeah, points. Yeah, because I remember he had beaten Kenny Omega in the first tournament, and it was like, oh, it was the huge shock because he hadn't been winning, and Kenny, you know, went to the finals and that whole thing. And then 2018 didn't have a very good year despite being the US champion. And then last year, again, just didn't really get going. And he was just kind of like that middle tier where nothing's really happening, kind of where like Goto is this year. But this year, he came out really strong, and I was really into it. And then he's kind of fallen, out of the chute a little bit. He hasn't picked up many wins of late. Since he got those 3 wins, he hasn't gotten another one. And this, to me, was like, all right, Evil now, after losing a few matches, has kind of just started to win and win and win and win. And at this very start of the tournament, he was my pick to come out of the B block. I'm thinking that's looking more and more likely as this tournament goes on. We're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, Sunday's match against Tetsuya Naito will be a big difference maker in that. But this just, it could have been a really good match. But I'm just really tired of the interference in Evil's matches. Like, this is where it's really starting to get to me.
I think it's... People have said this about Jay White, but I don't think it's different from Jay White because Gato and Jay White, it just works. And I think Jay has never been a good guy. Like, even when in 2018, when he was in Chaos, he wasn't doing anything to win. But it's almost like... And Gato's Gato, so he's not going to make a massive difference between this. Except Dick Togo, it's just he's there. He's got, like, we all know Gato has his brass knucks, but you have seen what Dick Togo, and I think you're right. Like, we've seen Evil have amazing G1 matches without all the interference. And I think if Evil would have beaten Juice Robinson in a cleaner way, I think it literally would have raised the stakes, and it would have made Evil like, oh, he's not just a bad guy. Like, he is still a good wrestler, because it's almost like since he joined Bullet Club, like, we've lost the Evil who won God knows how many World Tag Leagues with Sanada, who, like, has done really well in G1s and New Japan Cups.
I mean, you hit the nail right on the head there. To me, it's like Evil last year in the G1 had so many really good matches, like with Tanahashi, which we'll get to, obviously, as the main event of Day 12. But he had really good matches with so many guys. And I don't know if it's just him being much better suited wrestling that, like, babyface leaning tweener role where he can wrestle as heel or babyface depending who he's wrestling. But there's just... it's not doing it for me. And this, to me, was a perfect example of a match that didn't need the interference. Evil can beat Juice Robinson without interference. You need to be able to show that, because if you still need interference to beat, like, the mid-level guys, why am I taking you seriously as, the heavyweight champion? I know he's not heavyweight champion now, but I'm pretty sure at some point he will be again. But I don't know. It was more egregious in the second match that we'll talk about, but I think there's enough difference between the portrayal of Jay White and the portrayal of Evil when it comes to these things. And I find it much more bearable in the case of Jay White when there is interference than in this case. This case, it just, honestly, it's ruining a lot of Evil's matches for me, especially the Tanahashi match, which we'll get to.
I think Jay White is a lot more methodical, like, in terms of how he uses Gato. And he also, we've seen him use his own, like, methods of being, like, a dastardly heel. Whereas Evil, apart from, like, Dick Togo, what has he got? Like, oh, he's bringing out chairs, but that's with help from Dick Togo. Whereas really all Gato, it's a lot of just distractions. Whereas Dick Togo is actively taking part in these matches.
Yeah. I mean, there's the difference, and again, like I said, we'll get into it a little bit more because it really bothered me in the second match. But moving on fairly quickly, we then had Tetsuya Naito and Yoshihashi, which was a weird one for me personally. These two I feel like the dynamic of this match was just wrong. Dave Meltzer wrote in the Wrestling Observer, he made a very good point that, this show is in Hiroshima, and Tetsuya Naito is beloved there. Obviously, he has the connection with the baseball team. It's essentially, he gets like a hometown reaction when he's in the town, despite not actually being from there and all that sort of thing. But he was playing the heel in this match against Yoshihashi, and people still don't really care about Yoshihashi. I feel like if Naito was more of like a tweener leaning baby face, maybe acting frustrated and that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
you can still kind of play the heel a little bit, but this just the dynamic was off in this one, and they could have had a better match, but the fans didn't want to cheer for Yoshihashi, and they wanted to cheer for Naito, but when you're playing the heel, you don't give them like the reason to cheer. The match structure isn't flowing so that they can cheer for you, and it just kind of resulted in like not a lot of reaction for this one.
The funny thing is, I had the complete opposite. Like, I loved the match. Maybe it's because I have always been quite like a big fan of Yoshihashi, especially like recently. And I almost think like it was one of Yoshihashi's probably best matches. And I think I liked seeing this Naito again, like the sort of like you're saying with Evil, like the tweener, like he is like the heel sometimes and he's the babyface. And I think you're right, it is a bit of an issue, I think, with the crowd, but I think if you take away all of that, I think it was a very good match for Yoshihashi, and I think really has elevated. I think I saw someone on social media, someone said like it's really elevated his whole like let's go and do it attitude, and I think the match didn't harm Naito, and I think it has really helped, because I even saw in the chat like a lot of people said Yoshihashi is low-key one of like their MVP so far, and I agree. And I think it's one of those weird things. Naito's character is always weird because he is that tweener, but a tweener that's got so much support. And I think as long as that happens, there's always going to be an issue when Naito's going against the babyface. It's the same when he goes against people like Tanahashi.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make it clear. I still thought the match itself was good. I just felt like because of the fan dynamic that the reactions kind of took it back a step. If this was in another town, if this was in Osaka in particular, who have been harder on Naito than anywhere else, I think it could have been that much better. But I don't know. There was just something off about this one. And then we had the main event of Hiroshi Tanahashi defeating Kenta. Now, I really like this match. Again, I don't think it was like one of the standout main events of the tournament or anything like that, but I just adore Hiroshi Tanahashi. And, Kenta has come a long way since beginning in New Japan last year. He's done quite well for himself. He's kind of in that like middle tier right now. He is actually at like the lower end of the standings in the B block, which I find kind of surprising. But this was, another good match, helping Tanahashi kind of get back into the swing of things after losing a number of his first matches. So pretty
I also
pretty
think
good main event.
It was good because Kenta has cemented that he's doing very good matches. And like we said with Evil, Kenta's doing it quite clean. Yes, we obviously had the whole briefcase thing, and now there's like a massive dent and a sticker that says Tanahashi, because obviously Tanahashi did break the briefcase. But Kenta keeps proving that he can have good matches, and I think with Evil, he needs some of that. He needs to have a proper, pure wrestling match. And I'm like you. I'm so happy to see Tanahashi getting wins because he's one of my favorite people in the world. So I think, yeah, it was a great match for a main event. And I think if you have Tanahashi in a main event, you're always going to have a really good crowd reaction.
Absolutely. I mean, he's just about one of the best baby faces in the whole world and in the history of wrestling for that matter. And I'm very happy to kind of see him now back towards the top of the block. There's a lot of people kind of tied up in the middle there, but we'll see how things wind down in the final week of the tournament. But I would very much like to see Tanahashi in the mix. We've got some questions now as we kind of reach the halfway point. Stephen Kelly says, hey, Tempest and Sonal, you probably have answered my question. What's your favorite wrestling company at the moment? By the way, my second name is Kenny. Not Ken. Oh yeah, I'm just terrible at reading. But don't worry, love the content. Sorry about that, Stephen Kenny. I can't read for some reason. But favorite wrestling company at this very moment, I would probably say AEW, just because I think they're probably affected by the pandemic a little bit less. The presentation of their show, aside from having limited crowds, has kind of been more or less the same. Obviously, not as good as it could be, given the pandemic. But until the G1, I was kind of so on New Japan since coming back. The lack of crowds and everything just really took it down a step. Otherwise, I would say New Japan. New Japan's been my favorite for a long time.
Mine is like obviously New Japan's my top favorite, but also I watch DDT, which is a Japanese promotion. It's not for everyone. Like there are some great matches, but if you're not a fan of Toru Yano, I wouldn't recommend to buy a subscription because there is quite a lot of shows that mainly are like, we've got like DDT Boys, which is just like for female fans. There is like there was a show that was based entirely in a swimming pool. So if you're not a fan of Toru Yano, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, New Japan has always been one of my favorites. It's the thing I go to whenever like I've got time. So yeah, New Japan and DDT for me.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to go back and see a lot of how Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi started, that was in DDT. You know, so you can definitely look up that sort of thing. Otherwise, moving on to the second half, we have Tomohiro Ishii and Yujiro Takahashi. Now, this to me was the best match Yujiro Takahashi has had in the tournament, and again, it's Tomohiro Ishii pulling the best out of someone. It really shouldn't be surprising by this point, but you know, I thought that, you know, matches with Okada and Osprey, Kota Ibushi, Shingo Takagi would probably get a really good match out of Yujiro Takahashi. I didn't really see it. You know, some were better than others for sure, but this to me was the first time where I was like, yeah, that was a really good match. I'm like really enjoying watching a Yujiro match. So good on you, Yujiro. Yeah, you had a good one. Didn't win though. You still had 0 points with Ishii picking up the win.
I mean, it was sort of like there were points where like Yujiro easily could have won because he actually did quite well, like going straight away for the legs. But I mean, Ishii basically killed Yujiro's career in like the post-match comments. He was basically like, "Is this all you've got? Like the only thing you've got going for you is your entrance, and you've not even done that." So I think Ishii's probably, and I think that comment it could either like people could go, "Oh yeah, Yujiro's a bit rubbish," or it could be sort of the thing that maybe sparks Yujiro, like Will Ospreay, like matches that are coming. It could be the thing that clicks in Yujiro's mind, and he's like, right, I want to be more than just an entrance. Or like, obviously she's not there now, but when Peter's there, I'm more than just the Tokyo Pin. So I think this match could be something that breaks Yujiro or makes Yujiro.
We'll have to wait and see for tomorrow's show to get a glimpse, at least, into what's coming, though. And then we had Okada defeating Jeff Cobb. Now, I don't remember the last time, you know, Kazuchika Okada was so low on the card. It was probably the Yujiro match. Yeah. But this, to me, was another, because I think they only went like 11 minutes or something like that. This, to me, was like...
roll-up, I think. Wasn't it? Like something like that.
Yeah, he won... Okada won by roll-up, but... it was another example of like you put this match in the main event of a show and they'll tear the house down, but you put them second on the card in an 11-minute match and it's good, but it could be that much better, you know. And I've kind of mentioned throughout this tournament that Jeff Cobb is kind of suffering from that, the same way that Zack Saber Jr. did last year, where they weren't given any like really big long main event style matches. And while they've had good matches and their performances have been fine, the matches themselves can only get to a certain level because they're not given the opportunity to do anything more than that. So,
what it's like you could imagine this time last year if it was Jeff versus Okada with Okada as champion in the main event of one of the nights, and that would literally be a potential match of the year candidate.
That was a very good point. Like I wanted to say beforehand, and I had forgotten. That like if someone like Okada was the heavyweight champion right now, all of these matches that he has had would be promoted and billed as main events and that sort of thing, which hasn't happened. Obviously, you know, a lot of the matches that Naito has had have been given that kind of push, and like fair enough. But I don't know. This to me was just kind of that match that has suffered because of it, and it's kind of disappointing. But what can you do? On the plus side,
I think you were saying because it's even worse. I think in terms of like card placement is that normally you have an IC champion and a heavyweight. They're normally put in separate blocks, and you have the Intercontinental champion main eventing the one block, and then the heavyweight main eventing this. But because we've got two, like you can't really have the never champion in Suzuki being billed as one of the top. You can't have the never open weight. We don't have a United States champion in Japan at the moment. You can't have the tag champions. So that's the only thing that A Block are suffering with is they've not got that big person that they want to go after.
Right. That's a very good point as well. Yeah. Because Then after that, we have Will Ospreay defeating Minoru Suzuki in another match that probably would have been a little bit better with a different crowd or a different crowd setting, I guess, is probably more appropriate because the crowd itself wasn't bad or anything, but, you know, we're in a pandemic. Will Ospreay has been pushed very hard in this tournament, which I thought maybe he wouldn't be just because of the pandemic. We kind of don't really know what the future is going to hold for a lot of these foreign stars, whether they will be like just back and working New Japan full time, or if they will have to kind of come and go, which would make things much more difficult. But obviously, he's up there tied at the top of the block, which is very interesting, especially when it comes with wins over really big established stars like Minoru Suzuki. Of course, in the kind of level of match that you are, you know, you would expect to see from Will Ospreay at this point.
I mean, I was really shocked. Like, I am the biggest Suzuki-gun fan like ever, and like I thought, like, because we even thought going in, like, Will Ospreay was like, "I'm gonna die," and I think going into it, I was sort of a bit. I wanted Suzuki to win. I think there's something about his promo before, like Suzuki's the same age as my dad. I think some of Ospreay's promos can sort of downgrade my desire for him to win. So I went in obviously wanting Suzuki, and I think it was kind of a shock for me because Suzuki is Suzuki, and there's such contrast that I really thought Suzuki was going to have this one. Like I thought it was going to be another tick on Suzuki's win column. But like you said, if they are pushing Ospreay, as it seems they are, Suzuki is one of those more obvious wins compared to like Okada or Ibushi and things like that.
Yeah, this to me is one of those that really kind of stands out as, you know, you can beat some of the lower level guys in the tournament, but Ospreay going out there and getting a win over Suzuki is like, okay, he's establishing himself in the heavyweight division in a big way. So props to him at least for that. And then we had a match that I know that you were a big fan of, is Jay White versus Taichi, which to me, again, was very fun. It was, you know, you don't see pure heel versus heel matches like this very often, especially when it's two heels that are, you know, protected and that sort of thing. And they were trying to out heel each other, and eventually Jay White was able to come out on top of this one.
So this was one of the matches where I was most conflicted with it because I love them both so much, and it was quite funny because they were made it clear they respect each other. Like there's no hatred between the two. Even on the match itself, when Taichi came in, Jay White was on the chair clapping along to his entrance music. But yeah, it's one of those special things. Sometimes heel versus heel matches, I think they're my favorite kind of matches. But this one was really special because it wasn't just two guys just wrestling. There was a bit of, like you said, fun in it. Like the two of them at the start both going out of the ring with each other. And you know what? I think like either way, whoever won, I think it would have been good. Personally, I'm happy Jay won, but I would happily see another Taichi versus Jay match. And I think it was a very different match for both of them because it was a lot more lighthearted than we've seen in the past. And I think, yeah, it was definitely, I think it surprised a lot of people because it definitely wasn't what they expected.
No, definitely not. And then finally we had the main event, which was Shingo Takagi defeating Kota Ibushi. This to me was probably the match result that kind of shocked me the most. You know, maybe undeservedly so, because Shingo Takagi obviously is quite good, but he hasn't really been pushed and protected at that same kind of level, which is weird because a lot of the people in the B block, you know, we've got 4 people with 8 points, 4 people with 6 points. That's not a whole lot of difference, but the portrayal of them to me has been very different. You know, the people in the top 4 spots, to me, obviously are pushed as the front runners of the tournament, whereas the 4 people with 6 points are very much not so. And this was a person in that second column beating one of the people in the top column. And that is very interesting. We're going to have to see where this goes, but it was a fantastic match, a first-time ever match. These two had never had a singles match before, and I mean, these are two of the best in the world, and they showed it in this one.
It's quite funny because they were speaking about the history between them because they said I think they've been aware of each other for 12 years and they've wanted this match. And yeah, some people were saying they were shocked that Shingo won, and we shouldn't be shocked because it's Shingo Takagi. Like, it's a man who's like dominated New Japan since he had an undefeated streak, which is crazy. But I think this win was much needed. A main event win in the G1 was something that Takagi needed, especially because we've spoken in the past about Takagi's less sort of stable rise in the heavyweight division compared to Osprey. And this has cemented that he's like, I belong here. I not only beat Kodabushi, who's one of the best in the world, I beat last year's champion. I beat the year before's finalist, and you should take notice of me no matter what happens.
Yeah, this to me was a match that he really needed to kind of cement that. He absolutely has kind of now stepped up, where it helps that this was a big main event match. Getting a win over Ibushi in the middle of the card would probably still have done him very good, but this being in the main event really helped, because this to him, to me, this was him being the focal point of the show. And you need some shows like that for Shingo Takagi to continue his ascent in the heavyweight division. And that brings day 11 to a close. The only one we've got left here is day 12. Now, there are good and bad on this show. We'll kind of go through it. Haruki Goto, of course, defeated Yoshihashi. I really like this match. Mm-hmm. These are two guys that I have not been very high on throughout this tournament, but this gave me a reason to care. Goto has kind of been middle of the pack, maybe even lower than that. Yoshihashi is Yoshihashi. Today he only has, he's got the one win, so you kind of have the idea he's not winning this tournament. But you still had that chaos dynamic of this one, where Yoshihashi was kind of slapping Goto around at the beginning, and Goto fired up you're going to disrespect me. You are going to disrespect me. And I really like that kind of, dynamic, meaning that it's more than just your average G1 match. You could have a little respectful, friendly competition, but having this match and having them go at each other like that gave me a reason to care. And I wouldn't have cared otherwise. So 2 thumbs up for that.
And not only are they faction members, they're 2/3 of the never openweight 6-man tag titles. And I think we've seen this in the past, with so many of the factions. I think the one that maybe we don't see it with maybe is Bullet Club, but like we said, we'll see how it works. When faction members go against each other, I almost find that they're more brutal than going against an enemy, especially in terms of chaos. Chaos never take anything lightly, especially people like Goto and Ishii when he eventually has his interfaction stuff. They will not take each other lightly, and I think that's what you want. You want to see Goto fired up, and it was nice seeing them both like that, because it was a proper strong style match, and it's only going to make their trio tag team a lot stronger. Yeah,
it's almost like the factions when it gets to the G1 have a lot of built up resentment against each other. Just, not necessarily anything really harmful, but this is your one time a year where you let out the frustrations you've had with any of the friends that you have in your division or in your faction, and you get matches like this. So I really like that. And then we had what I thought was Toru Yano's best match of the tournament, where he faced Zack Sabre Jr. This was very much more of an actual match than most of the things that he's had. There were still comedy spots. He tied Zack Sabre Jr. up in a chair in the barricade, which was a little hokey for my liking, just because, as soon as that happens, you say, well, just turn the chair sideways and slip it through. But Sabre didn't do that until he was at 18 or 19 on the referee's count. But you got to do that kind of stuff to play it up for the fans. But this ended up being a really good little match, with Toru Yano showing he can wrestle, which I always like to see. Just, you don't do it every time, but every once in a while he goes and has a good wrestling performance. But of course, Zack Sabre Jr. ends up getting the submission win in the end. So another 2 thumbs up for this.
I think this is probably my favorite Toru Yano match. I always feel like I need a Toru Yano match in my top. And this one is because, Zack came in and he was like, yeah, I'm not having any of your rubbish today. I'm not, because he's not been winning. He did better, I think, than last year, but still not been picking up points. He came in, he's like, you've been fooling people. You're not going to do it. They started clean. They were going to go proper. It was like you said, it's probably I think it's the most wrestling that Yano's done in the past 5 months combined, actual wrestling. And in the end, it was the right thing, because if anyone is not going to take Yano's rubbish and actually find a way to counter it, it's Zack. And I also like that there was one point where Zack tried to play Yano's game where he basically had him in an ankle lock, dragged him to the outside to try and get the counter. Obviously, it didn't work, but it's nice seeing a different side. And I think it was nice because Zack was very vocal in this match. And I think sometimes Zack is at his best when he's vocal because he's throwing out all these insults. And sometimes it's just his voice, the way he says things. It like adds to a match. And this really was one of Yano's best matches.
Yeah, I also really like the trash talk and everything from Zack Sabre Jr. Even kind of like arguing with the referee, just saying like, "Why would I tie myself to the chair?" You know, because the referee thought that he was just bringing a chair in to be used on Yano. So very good stuff here. And then we had Sonata and Kenta, which was just like another good match. Nothing really stuck out to me in this one. It was just like, yeah, you know, they had a good match. Like everything else on this card there was something about it, good or bad, that really stuck out. This was like, it's another good match. You know, Sonata picks up another 2 points, which he needs as he's kind of climbing back into things, with obviously the Los Ingobernables de Japón people kind of clustering now at the top. But I don't know. There wasn't really anything that just jumps out at me on this one.
I think this match was mainly just probably another really quite simple way of getting Sanada another 2 points and reminding people like, no, Sanada is still here and he still has the chance, because people are still counting him out, but they don't realize like because nobody is undefeated, Sanada still has a pretty good chance of getting to the final.
Yeah. I mean, again, we'll go into it very soon when we go over the block standings, but I don't know, man. One more loss for Naito, and all of a sudden this block looks really interesting. You know, there's going to be a lot of people all kind of clustered together. You know, like there's in both blocks, there's very little separation from like top through like the 8th person in the block. It's like you go 1 through 8, and they're separated by like 2 points, and then you've got like 9 and 10 who are clearly at the bottom.
Yeah.
You know, we'll
Yoshihashi and that like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because then we had Tetsuya Naito versus Juice Robinson, and I really liked this match. This to me was very interesting because you got to see Juice and Naito, at least even in the beginning when they were doing like their different clap, you know, rhythms and everything like that. It was almost kind of like playful with each other for a little bit, like they were kind of smiling through it, and then it obviously turned into, you know, the match that they had. It was very good. It was north of 20 minutes. It was one of Juice Robinson's best matches of the tournament. And then when Juice lost, his reaction to losing really made me like start thinking and feeling like there's different ways to show your emotion in losing a match. You know, there can be, you know, it can be rage, you know, it can be just absolute frustration. But he was almost like, man, this was my shot, you know, because he hasn't won since he won those first 3 matches, and this was his shot. You know, you beat the champion, you'll get a title match, not necessarily at the G1 or at the Tokyo Dome, but you'll get a title shot. And he lost this match, and this was really disappointing for him. It was like he wasn't angry like Zack Sabre Jr. is when he loses. It was like, man, this was my shot.
It was sort of like a sad. It was sort of like a deflated, like, yes, I can go through this tournament winless from now on, but if I get that single pin over Naito, then it's a win. But I think it was an interesting thing because, like you said, they started off playfully, then it got very serious, but then we got to it where Naito was like, Juice, and even after, so you saw that reaction from Juice after Naito, and he literally walked to the back of the ring like, Juice. And that's when you're reminded that, remember, Naito is not a babyface. He is a tweener, and you actually felt like Juice got a lot of, like, compared to the Yoshihashi Naito, a lot of the crowd did want Juice to win because Juice is probably the most popular gaijin in Japan. Like, he is basically one of their own.
Yeah. At least at this point, you know, going through the New Japan dojo and all that sort of thing really helps with something like that. I saw a quick chat here before we get to the main event from Gatecrasher Forever, saying overall really enjoying it, but not had the abundance of 5-star matches. from that last year had but that could be due to the lack of Gaijin stars, meaning Yano and Yujiro are in instead. There's a few things I need to point out for that one. I mean, one is like Yano's going to be in this tournament basically no matter what. So I don't think it's like the lack of Gaijin stars. They kind of brought in most of the Gaijin stars that they would have. I don't think someone like Jon Moxley was going to be in this tournament no matter what, just because of Dynamite being on TV now. So, whereas I think the lack of like 5-star matches, quote unquote, is more because of the pandemic and the lack of like crowd cheering. Whereas like if you bump up and have a hot crowd for all these matches, I think most of the ones that are like 4.5 stars, 4 3/4 stars, they get bumped up to 5 because having a hot crowd just helps so much, but doesn't matter too much.
I was gonna say, I think Yano's gonna be in the tournament until he retires, or until they come a year where maybe he gets like 2 points. But honestly, like he is that person you need to have him in the G1 because you can't just keep having these like 20-minute matches. You need, like we keep saying, like the breaks in between. You need the funny bits. It's like the G1 for me isn't the G1 without Toru Yano.
Yeah. And then we had the main event, the final match we will talk about, which was Evil and Hiroshi Tanahashi, which to me was like the biggest example of just enough with the interference. I've had enough. No more. I'm sick of it. If you want to have, like, you could just have him beat Hiroshi Tanahashi if he's going to beat Hiroshi Tanahashi. I'm tired of seeing Dick Togo ruining some of these matches. This to me was a match that was ruined by the interference. You know, like it was good until it wasn't. And I'm just over it. No more. Stop. Full stop. No more Bullet Club interference. I'm over it.
I mean, you say that, and that's sort of like what was mine, was it 2 years ago when we had the Tongans? But at least with the Tongans, whenever they had it, there was a storyline to that. It was the Bullet Club civil war. Whereas I think Dick Togo is just there now for the sake of it. And I think, do it once, like, it's fine. Maybe have Dick Togo on the apron, like, distracting the ref, so, like, Evil can get a chair. But the number of times Dick Togo is used, like, honestly, I've only seen Dick Togo for a few months, and I'm sick of him. Whereas with someone like Gato, I'll happily have Gato there all the time, but it's not a good thing that people are sick of Dick Togo, and he's barely been in the company for, like, a few months.
Yeah, I mean, the way I also kind of see it is, like, when you had the Tongans and Bad Luck Fale kind of running through, that's someone who would have been in the tournament if he would have been there. It was Bad Luck Fale.
Yeah, I was going to say that the Tongans as well, and would probably have been, especially I think Tangaloa's made it clear each year that he wanted a spot in it because he keeps getting missed out.
Yeah, so I think someone like that, one of those guys at least, would have taken the Yujiro spot, I think. But regardless, when you had Bad Luck Fale and Tamatonga like ruining all of their matches during the G1 in 2018, I don't think you were really going into any of their matches expecting like a fantastic performance anyway. And usually they were all kind of short. Whereas these matches, like this is a 20-minute main event that just has Dick Togo coming in and choking out Tanahashi, you know. I'm just, I'm tired of it. But regardless, that brings the end of day 12. Quickly, I will go over the block standings now, because in the A block, we have 4 people tied at 8 points at the top. Jay White, Will Ospreay, Kota Ibushi, and Kazuchika Okada. Then 4 people tied at 6 points. Tomihiro Ishii, Minoru Suzuki, Taichi, and Shingo Takagi. Then Jeff Cobb at 4, and Yujiro at 0. So 4 people that could all theoretically win at 8 points, and then a few people who could, you know, sneak into that top tier with 6 points. And then
so
B
technically
block,
there are 8 people in A block who could win, because literally all you need is someone with the 6 points to get 2 wins, and then everyone who's got 8 points to lose their next matches. And you literally can swap the 2 sets of names.
Exactly. You know, a few of these guys in column B beat a few of the guys in column A. All of a sudden, everyone's kind of tied. And then B block, has Tetsuya Naito at 10. He's the only person in the tournament with 10 points. Then Evil with 8. And then Tanahashi, Goto, Yano, Sonata, Zack Saber Jr., and Juice Robinson all with 6, and then Kenta at 4 and Yoshihashi at 12. So tons
Tim,
of
not 12. Yoshihashi does not have 12 points.
He does not have 12. 2 points. Solid 2 points from Yoshihashi. But yes, and that kind of brings our analysis of this week's shows to a close. We will be back tomorrow. I believe Randy Andy Datson will be joining me on my birthday to watch day 13 of the G1 Climax tournament. Kazuchika Okada versus Shingo Takagi will be the main event. Very excited for that. So we'll wait and see that. Of course, you can follow us both on Twitter and all that. And Sonal, tell them where they can find you here on YouTube.
So I have a YouTube channel, Sonal's Life. Make sure to give it a watch, some of my videos, subscribe, because especially like in the coming few months, I'm gonna have so much New Japan content that you're probably gonna get sick of me. But hopefully you'll enjoy it all.
Absolutely. And of course, Sonal has a new feature list going up on WrestleTalk.com today. It will be tweeted out in a little bit. It will be Jay White's 7 best G1 Climax matches over the last 3 years. Make sure you give that a read. It's very good. And with that being said, we will see you next time.
Bye.